You don't always react when something hurts you. You don't raise your voice. You don't argue. You don't explain what you're feeling. You just go quiet. And from the outside, it can look confusing, like you don't care, like nothing really affected you. But inside, something very different is happening. Because silence isn't emptiness. For you, it's protection. Think about the last time something hurt you. Maybe someone said something that stayed with you. Maybe you felt ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood. In that moment, you had something to say, but instead of speaking, you paused. You held it in. You let the moment pass. And later, you replayed in your mind. Again and again. Not because you didn't care, but because you care too much. People often misunderstand this. They think silence means weakness, or avoidance, or emotional distance. But that's not what's really happening. Because when you go quiet, your mind doesn't shut down. It actually becomes louder. You start analyzing everything. What was said? What was meant? What you should have said instead. And while others move on quickly, you stay with it, processing, trying to understand it fully. Pause for a second. How many times have you stayed silent, but had entire conversations in your head later? Things you wish you said, things you wish they understood. That's not passivity. That's emotional processing happening internally. So why does this happen? Why do some people express hurt immediately, while others go quiet instead? It often comes down to what your mind learned early on. At some point, expressing your feelings didn't feel safe. Maybe you were misunderstood when you tried. Maybe your emotions were dismissed or minimized. Maybe speaking up made things worse instead of better. So your brain adapted. It learned that silence is safer. Instead of reacting instantly, you observe, you think, you calculate the outcome of speaking versus staying quiet. And most of the time, quiet feels like the better option. Not because you don't have feelings, but because you're protecting them. There's also something deeper happening. When you're hurt, you don't just react to the moment. You feel everything connected to it. The meaning behind the words, the shift in tone, the intention you sensed. It's layered. And because it's layered, it takes time to process. So instead of expressing something incomplete, you stay silent. But that silence can be heavy. Because what you don't say doesn't disappear. It stays inside. You carry it. You think about it later. You try to make sense of it. And sometimes you convince yourself it's not worth bringing up. It's fine. It doesn't matter. I'll just let it go. But you don't fully let it go. You just stop expressing it outwardly. And over time, this creates a pattern. You become the person who handles things quietly. The one who doesn't create conflict. The one who keeps things inside. The one who seems calm, even when you're not. From the outside, this can look like emotional strength. And in some ways it is. You don't react impulsively. You don't escalate situations unnecessarily. You think before you speak. That's a form of control. But there's a hidden side to it. Because constantly holding things in comes with a cost. It builds pressure, not all at once, but slowly, quietly. You might notice it in small ways. Feeling distant without knowing why. Getting tired more easily in social situations. Overthinking interactions long after they're over. Or feeling like people don't fully understand you. Because they only see what you show, not what you hold back. Pause and reflect for a moment. When you go quiet, is it because you have nothing to say or because you have too much to say? That difference matters. There's also something else. People who go quiet when hurt are often highly aware of others. You notice emotions. You read tone. You sense shifts in energy quickly. So when something feels off, you pick up on it immediately. But instead of reacting outwardly, you process inwardly. You try to understand before you respond. And sometimes you understand so much that you excuse what hurt you. You tell yourself they didn't mean it, that they were stressed, that it's not a big deal. And while that might be true, your feelings still exist, even if you don't express them. This is where the pattern becomes complicated, because your empathy can override your expression. You understand others, but don't always give yourself the same space. And over time, this can make you feel unseen, not because people don't care, but because they don't know. They don't know what you didn't say. They don't know what you held in. They don't know what you processed alone. And here's the shift most people miss. Going quiet isn't the problem. It's what happens after that matters. If silence gives you space to understand your feelings, that's healthy. If it helps you respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively, that's strength. But if silence becomes the place where everything stays, unspoken, unresolved, that's where it starts to hurt you. Because your feelings don't disappear just because you don't express them. They wait, they build, they show up in other ways. So the real question isn't, why do I go quiet? It's, what do I do with what I feel after I go quiet? Because your silence was never meant to be a permanent home. It was meant to be a pause, a space to process, not a place to stay forever. And once you see that, something starts to change. You begin to notice your patterns. When you go quiet, why you go quiet, what you're holding back. And instead of judging it, you understand it. You realize your silence came from somewhere. It was learned. It was shaped. It had a purpose. It protected you. But now, you have a choice. You don't have to react instantly. You don't have to say everything in the moment. But you also don't have to keep everything inside. You can take your time and still express what matters. Because your voice doesn't lose its value just because it comes later, and your feelings don't become less important just because you process them quietly. You're not someone who shuts down. You're someone who processes deeply. And once you understand that, you stop seeing your silence as a flaw. You start seeing it as a signal, a sign that something mattered. And instead of ignoring it, you listen to it. Because going quiet was never the problem. Not knowing how to come back from that silence was. And once you learn that, you won't just stay quiet anymore. You'll understand when to speak, when to pause, and when your voice deserves to be heard. If this felt familiar, there's more beneath your silence than you think. And understanding that might be the beginning of finally understanding yourself.